everybody. Welcome back to You Can't Win. This is episode 15, and today we are joined by our good friend Ed Buck from West Hollywood, and he's going to be talking to us a little bit about his hate consumption of podcasts and maybe a few other things. So how you doing, Ed?
Doing good. How are you guys?
Doing wonderful.
Okay. Yeah, I'm doing great.
Great.
Yeah. So what should the people know about you before we begin? A little bit about you.
I just like to have a lot of fun. I'm just a guy. Yeah, there's not much. I think I was raised in Arizona, and then I moved to California. It's really good here. Nothing bad ever happened.
Okay. Yeah. Ed has a Wikipedia page that you can all check out if you're interested. And he also has a Twitter account at I think it's Whole Sweat right now.
Yeah. That's the Twitter. I think I'm gonna probably delete that though. But okay for now.
Well, for now, yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we were going to talk a little bit about this weird hobby of yours, where you like to listen to podcasts you hate or something like that. So why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So I was I think the genesis of the idea was that a lot of people for a long time on book blogs were putting out these challenges of like only reading women for a year, or later on it became only reading books by women of color for a year, and so on. It just there was this process of accretion. And I was like, I'm not reading any books. I'm not reading enough books for it to be challenging. So I might as well apply this to a thing that I actually do every day on the commute. I listen to podcasts like an hour there, an hour back. So every day I would just, instead of listening to things that I liked, I used the Apple Inspiring Women section, and I listened to one of those every day for a few months. I started in 2018, and I did it basically until the end. And then I kind of broke down and stopped. What it did is kind of change my attitude towards podcasts. I don't like podcasts anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, it made me a lot more aware of like podcasts are like a thing to waste time. They're just a thing to make your hour go away. You're just sort of like stuck in traffic or whatever, and you just want to kind of fall asleep, but you can't. So you do the next best thing. And yeah, I think it's what I think is important about it is that there's a kind of an element, I think, of pain. Always you do anything, whenever you like read or try to like watch a movie, even if it's something you like really enjoy, there's like an element of like, I think Gadamer called it like the Anstoß, like this conflict where you first encounter something that's new, like you have to encounter a new situation or a new kind of setting, new environment. And it kind of breaks you. It kind of slowly makes you kind of be aware of this other thing. And again, that's like present even if you listen to something you like or watch something you like, read something you like. But it's very present if you do something you don't like, or like you have to do for work or for, kind of this weird Xbox challenge that I've set up. So yeah, that's kind of like, yeah, that's why I kind of began doing it. And that's what like I kind of became very aware of. It's just there's this pain and this constant conflict that exists.
This makes me feel like very powerful as a podcast.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Destroying people's lives.
Yeah,
that's right. I think there's like, I don't know if I like made up this, but like, or maybe it is in Gadamer, but there is a kind of I think, experience, or like this sort of clearly kind of focused experience or representation of something that you sort of intentionally like kind of are aware of is like a brick. It's like a rock kind of, and you are as a subject, as a kind of receptive, I don't know, understanding, a faculty of understanding. You're like a pane of glass or like a window pane. And the brick kind of just hits you and breaks you. And it's kind of like, I think the importance of the fact that it's a brick is that it's sort of like slowly passes through you. Like it's not just like a momentary thing, but it's like it's like slowly for an hour, it just sort of breaks you down. And then you sort of reconstitute yourself afterwards. But again, like especially in late Gadamer or like Heidegger, that kind of thing, it's always like, oh, but it's always, you're supposed to sort of align yourself towards a kind of a receptivity of a future, horizon or whatever. It's always like very it's a kind of an element of mindfulness. But for me, there's just kind of pain. It's just sort of painful every time. And there's no lesson at the end. There's no like, I didn't enter this new hermeneutic horizon. I just suffered. There's just suffering.
Okay.
Which also, like, hermeneutically, suffering is like a pathway back to sort of like, you're meant to sort of suffer so like you become aware of your own mortality or finitude, and then you come back to kind of enlightenment or whatever. But it does
right, like there's a little bit of like a self-development, like you become something better, or or at least different, sort of a thing.
Yeah, that's kind of like it's more applies to things like gym, right? It's more applies to things like where you actually sort of exercise something and become a better man. I think like in these sorts of things, it's just sort of a sink of time, and you just feel that you are aware of your finitude in the sense that you are dying. It's an hour of your life in your like intellectual prime or whatever, and then when you're still like kind of aware of things, and it's just gone, and it's gone, and it kind of left in its wake. It's just a sort of endless, pain.
This is such good advertisement for the podcast.
Use me, like iTunes should hire me. Or like, oh, do you want to suffer for an hour? But no. But then again, like I think that's also like the awareness of pain sort of like goes away, and then you feel much better afterwards. You sort of like, oh, okay, I don't have to do this again for a day or whatever. You just have to sort of live with it. After that, it becomes better, I think. And that's the thing. That's the sort of, you become a better person by not experiencing or something. I don't know. The lesson part I haven't got. Maybe I'm not.
Yeah.
I haven't got the spiritual XP points, but the pain part I got a lot.
I'm imagining the podcast you were listening to interspliced with you talking about this now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like you're listening to something called like, I don't know, Glisten or something, or like,
You can't make fun of it. Like, it's like on that level where I think the joke is like doesn't hit the bottom the way the object itself hits the bottom. So I could read out some of the names.
Yeah. What have you been listening to?
So the big one is called, the one that I've kind of stuck with for a long time is the Barstool podcast called Call Her Daddy. That's the one I've stuck with for a long time. And that's like, they just do like, primarily they do ad reads. That's what most of these are. You become aware that in that kind of, I guess it's like once you made it, there's 6 or 7 ad reads per episode, and they're all kind of read. They're not like cut breaks or whatever. They're all like read throughout, and it's just there's like one in the beginning, one at the end, 4 or 5 in the middle, and they're all about like sex toys. They're all about like really bad sex toys, like things that I didn't know existed, like organic condoms, that kind of thing, organic female condoms, that kind of thing. And then they're like, there's just like weird pastes and stuff. I don't know. But it's sort of ever present. It's just like this feeling of like complete contempt for the audience, complete contempt for that you're just being like kind of, there's just charlatanry. They're just selling you stuff, and they're not like, there's no content. It's just like selling you things. But that's the big one. That's the one I like. There's one called That's So Retrograde, and that's an astrology podcast. And they do like, you would think that they just do astrology, but that's not all they do. They do things like, last one I heard was they invited a person who's like a social media dating reader. He's like a person who's like a coach for you when you're on Tinder or whatever, on OkCupid, I don't know. And he kind of does a reading. He does a reading for that person, and he kind of goes like, "Oh, you're not compatible because of this, this, and that, or whatever." He does that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I like that. There's a lot of healing podcasts. People that are healers. Those are good.
How does that work? Like, do people call in like, "Oh, my back hurts," and then the guy heals them over the podcast or something?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't be like, it's like you have to be a charlatan, so you have to be like, oh, here's what I'm sensing in your life, right? Or like,
Yeah.
how's your chakras aligned? What your sign is, are you in retrograde, whatever? And then you sort of like, you don't just go like, oh yeah, now you're healed, right? You have to pretend like there's a work involved. So you do,
Sure.
Oh, Tom, your back hurts. Oh, that's interesting. So how's your family? How are you feeling about like, and you do that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very that kind of thing. There's one that I listened to, which is Alyssa Milano, the woman that did the sex strike on Twitter or whatever. She's an actress, but she did a podcast with Clymer, Charlotte Clymer. Listen to that one. That one was great. Those guys are always good. But that one was good. Yeah, I don't know. There's at least like 50 that are of that kind of variety. But yeah, those are kind of like the worst ones. Oh, actually, there's a really bad one, which is called Web of Women, which is has no theme whatsoever. It's just a woman that has 6 friends, and then those 6 friends recommend 6 more guests, and that's the web. That's the Web of Women.
Wait, so there's 6 plus 6 plus 1 people on one podcast?
No. She does like it's seasons. There's like there's going to be multiple seasons, and on the first season, 6 people that are important to her life, and then each one of those recommends a person. So it goes like, it creates like this other season is based on recommendations of the previous one.
Oh, okay. Well, that's kind of clever, to be honest.
I like that part. I like kind of the but then the podcast itself is just like, oh, I was a student in, I think it was like Brown or something, and then I became a TV writer, and it's just like kind of going through. Yeah, like formally, it's actually kind of clever. I like that part, which is why I like when I actually encounter the content. It's very hard. It's just kind of the overwhelming sort of, I guess it's the form of the content, is that a person talks to another person for an hour, and they're just sort of like about their college experience or about their early work experience, and that's it. And that's, for me, there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than just like kind of you and another person who's your friend from outside, and it's just like, tell me about yourself. What do you like? Like, how do you come to be who you are? What do you think about the Trump administration? That kind of thing. That's, to me, it does not get worse than this. It's hard on that kind of, again, like on a physical level. It's very hard for me to care what this random person I don't care about thinks about Donald Trump, because of the way they kind of narcissistic self-constitution brought them up to this one particular point. But that's just what I think. I don't know, maybe it's really great. So these are kind of the ones that are really painful. Again, like the things that you kind of find out are, first, the ad reads. Second, generally there's kind of like a contempt for audiences. So the episodes would be split in like multiple parts. There would be like 30-minute episode, 2 ad reads, and then, you'll be putting them to another thing. And there's a kind of I think there's a criterion effect, right? There's like, if you listen to like the big podcasts, like if you listen to, I don't know what the big ones are anymore, but like NPR or like Serial, you kind of get exposed to the best. You get exposed to like the highest production quality with a lot of thought put into every minute of it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go like a little bit below that, you just encounter like a sea of schlock. Like there's just a sea of, nobody cares what happens for an hour. And that's essentially like, that's what I think is a criterion effect, is that if you only watch Criterion movies, you'll think, oh, this is this great, kind of, what a great repository of art, but if you actually like go through and like every year that the Criterion was putting out movies, you'd go to the movies and watch like the best blockbusters, you get a very different picture. And it's sort of like shocking again, like in each one of those like kind of premium, really good things, there's 1,000 mediocre or really bad things.
Yeah.
And you kind of skew yourself towards the really great things. And you're not aware of just how, like, there's just kind of like, again, there's just kind of contempt. There's an audience, I don't know, of humiliation. I don't know how to describe that.
Do you think they actually have substantial audiences? Do they have actual enough to justify all these advertising and all that? Or like, do they actually, make money off these things for their careers and things? Or, or is it viable at all or no?
Well, I don't know how viable it is. I think there are like a lot of stats. There's the reviews and stuff, and there is, ratings and downloads. I think there was a boom. There was a brief sort of like podcast kind of, people are listening to this. Let's capitalize on it. And there was a kind of an investment wave. And there were like these networks, like I think Gimlet is one of them. There's like a few others. Many of them are affiliated with like another sort of news or media organization. But there was a kind of an idea that, you can just kind of like a business and it just sort of like funds itself after a certain point. And that idea, I think, is dead now. I don't think that anyone sort of thinks, well, I don't want to like discourage you guys, but generally, I think it's not really like a way to like, it's not gonna, I think there was an opening for like big money sort of thing, and then it just sort of closed, and now it's more again like I think if you do like nothing like kind of huge, if you don't invest like because some of them have like a lot of money invested in terms of like investigation, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's not really what we're
trying
to do, so.
Like I'm not, but there was this idea that you could just kind of just throw money at it. You could just like kind of make whatever you want, and that idea is gone now. But I mean, I think that there's still like a window for it, but it's a lot sort of like more realistic. So again, like if you look at like these like great sort of on Apple, I don't know what it is on other apps, there were like these categories of like, look at all of these, and there would be like, it's like a graveyard. It's like on Twitter, you could just see like a lot of threads where like a lot of people are sort of disabled. This tweet is not available anymore. Mm-hmm. On podcasts, it's like, this was active in 2016 and 2017, and and they're all kind of shattered now. But yeah, like I think like there was this sort of boom, and then there was a bust, and today it's more like, it sort of exists, but you have to be independently popular. I think you have to be somehow like kind of. A lot of the people are sort of writers on like shows and stuff, or like actors or journalists with a lot of kind of like Twitter clout, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think what they say about podcasts is that like a lot of them just die like within the first few episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Like the majority die before
mm-hmm.
they get to their 7th episode.
Okay.
And
so you guys made it. It's
so far, yeah, we're doing okay.
Now it's you made the 7th episode. It's gonna last forever.
Yep.
We'll be just inflicting pain on everybody for eternity, like ghosts.
That's right. But yeah, like some of them last a long time, and but yeah, I feel like a lot of, especially if it's not, is put into like, why are we doing this? And it's just like we're just talking about on that topic or whatever. That doesn't last a very long time. It seems to me. Usually the ones that sort of last are the ones that have like this sort of, let's discuss one book a week or something. Those things kind of last because I think people sort of have a plan for like the next few months.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just 3 guys in a room or 3 women in a room, I don't know. Like I feel like people kind of get tired of that. The presenters, not the audience. I don't know exactly what the audience dynamic is, but they just sort of stop.
Yeah, I think it's hard to keep like that little spark or whatever that keeps people interested.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to a lot of comedy stuff, and
mm-hmm.
you can really tell like that they have good weeks or good periods of time where you're just like interested in listening to each episode, and then something happens, and it could even just be one joke doesn't land right in an episode, and then you're just sort of like off it for a while, and you may come back to it later. But I think it's really hard to just keep things going consistently, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, with comedy, there is kind of the A-list. I think there is like kind of the big ones. Yeah, they're not even the funniest ones, but they are usually kind of like, these are the funniest people, and they do like decent production and stuff. And then below it, I think there's a sea of really sort of, I don't want to say like really bad stuff, but there's like, you get good episodes and you get really bad episodes. And I think that's the majority of it. It's just like people just trying jokes, and, you know, it's not necessarily a failure, but it's, yeah. There is a kind of criterion effect. If you kind of go like, oh, there's all these podcasts I could be listening to, and then you try a few. Maybe not every week.
Well, you know, I've been wondering, you know that you can listen to like things that you like. Right?
Yes, you could do that. But I feel like you have to sort of, every now and then, you have to stop liking what you like and just move on. I feel like that's true for everything, is that you can't, you know, you have to be moving, and your relationship to art, or like I see it as sort of a form of art. Your relationship to a given form has to be kind of reconstituted in a major way. Otherwise, you're sort of stuck, or you're kind of dead. So you have to consciously kind of adopt a different position. I think that's true for everything. I don't think it's just true because I don't think you should naturalize your taste. Like, you don't think you should think of things that are like funny or good or like enjoyable just because they are sort of innately so. I think they are contingently so. You sort of like, there are sort of presuppositions. When you like something, you have a kind of like a syllogism in your head where like, these types of things are good, and then this thing is of this type of thing, and therefore I like this thing. Right. Okay.
Yeah. I find myself like, there's a podcast. I actually watch it more on YouTube because there's a lot of visual stuff, but it's called King and the Sting. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No, I haven't.
It's Theo Vaughn and Brendan Schaub. So it's two
cool.
LA comics, and it's pretty low. You know, it's not really like heavy intellectual stuff at all. Like, you know what I mean? It's really dumb jokes and stuff. But
that's
I find
very
myself
different from Theo Vaughn's usual output. He's more of a Derridian, I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or musician.
I'm a big fan of him. But
I like him.
That show really cracks me up like every time, and I can find myself laughing at stuff that it's not even that funny. I just am primed to laugh. Like, I just have decided that this is funny. I'm going to enjoy this, and then I enjoy it because I decided beforehand. And I think there's a lot to that with people becoming like fans of shows and stuff. They just sort of like decide that this is for me. This expresses something about who I am, or this has some value to me to be a fan of, and then I'm just going to enjoy it, even if it's not. I don't want to say authentic, because you know that kind of gets into the question of like what is actually authentic enjoyment and everything. But there's a difference between someone really catching you by surprise consistently, making you laugh every single time in that way, versus you sort of having like this established relationship with the thing.
Yeah, I think that's true to a much greater extent than people kind of admit, where like, I think the fact that you sort of set up to like something ahead of time, or like you're open to it, that does like most of the heavy lifting. Like, I mean, you won't like something that's clearly sort of like really like badly shoddily put together, but if it's sort of in a ballpark and you are kind of already sort of sympathetic to it, you're going to receive it well. And that's, I think, a lot of like taste is just sort of formal, kind of on the level of a sentence, on the level of like, I like this stuff. Like, in your head, there's like the way I think of things is just, there's like a billboard in my head, and it just kind of goes, oh, this is nice. And it doesn't really there's no real other thing. Like it doesn't actually like go like, oh, I like this aspect or whatever. It just kind of goes, I like this, and that's it. And I think that's the end of a lot of things. It's just like you formally are committed to a position ahead of time that you're gonna like enjoy this or enjoy that, and or not enjoy it. Or you're gonna be like kind of, oh, I dislike this, I disagree with this, and then therefore I will it will be painful for me to do this. So it's kind of like, yeah, there's an element definitely, or actually I think it's the determinant element of how you actually set up to do or to like certain things. And again, like to be stuck in one position, I think is sort of, it's like a conciliation. It's like I think it's a sort of a surrender.
So when you're kind of thinking this through in your head, like, are you trying to mature and refine your taste to some higher level, or do you just think it's like a cycling kind of thing where you have to sort of just shift around between different things and there's no actual ultimate? Like, do you think you actually are developing in a progressive way that you will eventually have very, very refined tastes and very, be quite mature about these kind of things? Or is it just kind of a helpless kind of process that you're just kind of trapped in?
I think there's an element of relativism, or it could be seen as a kind of relativism in the sense of, I don't really think of it in terms of like a natural capacity, like a faculty of taste. I think of it as a level of commitment. So you kind of you have to sort of, I don't want to say decisionist, but you have to decide that, okay, this is kind of how I want to constitute myself, and therefore I will like this. And at that point, you will open yourself up to the object in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. And you can't really rationalize it fully. I don't think there is a sort of truly, I think there is, again, like I said, there is a kind of a pseudo syllogism in your head where it goes like, this thing is good, I like this thing, and so on. But it's not truly rational in the sense that you don't, your reason doesn't kind of a priori figure out why you like something. It's
right, like there is a reasoning. Like you could say, like, I like this because ABC, but that ABC may not have a proper reasoning to it, or eventually you kind of get to a point where it's essentially arbitrary.
True, and I think it's also like with comedy, and I think it's also true for all forms of art. There is a kind of a persistent idea of like a kind of a surplus that you can't really fully explain why you like something. So that's why I think it kind of arguments about it degenerate to like ethical arguments where like, oh, this guy punches down and this guy punches up or whatever. And that's how people justify being on this sort of position. But for me, it's you're sort of entering onto this land of surplusage where you can't really fully envelop it in language. You can't fully sort of make an argument for it. You just sort of like it. And I do think that you kind of choose to like it, but it's not full. Like it's not fully within kind of the will. It's more like you kind of attracted naturally. You're sort of attracted naturally in the sense of like it just happens. You kind of like drift towards certain things, and yeah, you just kind of let yourself drift, and eventually you find things. Again, like it will create kind of contradictions, I think, in that, this is kind of like, this is not really what I am or whatever, or this is not really how I want to be seen in public or whatever. But there's no real kind of, I don't think there's like a kind of like a faculty of taste where like you see a representation and you like fully sort of justify your relationship to it in terms of like, I don't know, a rational argument or a kind of in terms of understanding. You don't really fully justify it as something that fits into this other system of objects. You just sort of see something and you move towards it, and the justifications are kind of post hoc and sort of arbitrary.
Yeah. So I guess even getting back to the actual episodes that you were listening to and things like, so you said the advertising bothered you a lot. Were there other things that kind of kept popping up that really, really kind of grinded at you that really caused this kind of pain? Like, was there certain tropes and stuff that you kind of like constantly encountered that kind of realized, I don't know, were like grinding at you kind of thing?
Yeah, I think it's the voices. I think I've talked about this before, but I mean, a lot of people are not voice actors. You're not trained, and you don't know how like we don't really have like this sort of tradition in America where like, oh, you know, you have to sort of, you're not brought up on radio in the same way. Talk radio is a little bit like that. There are really like kind of good trained voices there, but podcasts are not like that. So you're not sort of like expected to be like really pleasant to listen to for 100 hours. So so voices are really bad. I don't know what it is about, like, I know that there's a way in which you can kind of modify your voice where like you can kind of speak a little higher, a little lower. And I think there was like a project, which I believe was probably Hollywood, some guy in Hollywood decided that the coolest, that will be coded as sexy for women. The speech would be that's the most sort of like desirable is this sort of really high pitched, really sort of vocal fray, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That should be coded as that's what a woman should sound like. And it's just, I think it's just in English that it's this way. And it's just grating. It's this high pitched kind of like very sort of like vocally, like very inset into the, I don't know what the proper term is, but it's very deep into the throat.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, you know, hi.
Yeah.
That sound.
I hate that.
That sound. It's a lot. I mean, in Arabic they use it a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true.
But like, it's fine in Arabic because it's sort of like it's naturalized. But in women,
Right.
in the way that women only on radio, I think, like when you talk to people normally, they don't do this. Well, they do this, but not as much. But like, especially on sort of like when it's right there in your ear, it's just like high pitched and this sort of like glottal stuff, and it's like, yeah, it's just accretes. It just kind of gelatins together where like this voice in your head. But again, like if I was a human and I was talking to another human, I would just like walk away, right? But because this is like a thing on my head that I can't remove, it's just there.
Donald, did you catch that? Did you catch? He just said, "If I was human."
Yeah.
I think this explains a little bit.
That's right. Yeah. It's becoming alien. Anyway, I think it's, yeah, that's one of the things. Another thing I think is just like, I just disagree with a lot of people. I just disagree with their sort of politics. I disagree with their opinions on like the way society should be structured. And I can let that go if it's, again, if we're friends and we're just talking, or we're just sort of, you know, we have like a kind of a common purpose or whatever. But if it's just me and you in a kind of in a room in my head, right, in a room in my headphone where I'm just sitting and listening to you, I can't let that go. It just sort of comes back. And there's like abortion stuff that's always like, oh, you know, that should happen. Or like, you know, there's this, you know, kind of Trump stuff that's always like, oh, you know, we should just vote for Hillary Clinton or, you know, whoever the next one is. And it's just like right there, it's just like a shared assumption that's like repeatedly affirmed. Again, it's one of the little things. It's not like big. It's only, you know, a few times, but it kind of, if you hear it again and again every day, you're sort of like, oh, okay, I get it. Okay. And it's sort of like, it pains you a little bit. It just adds up. It's a lot of it is just sort of dealing with magnitude. It's not, in each particular case, it's like a pinprick, but if it's kind of adds up, you sort of become jittery. It becomes sort of like, oh, okay, I expect this. I expect this to be like kind of annoying to me.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's why I kind of think like a lot of like sort of women's issues, I now think like why isn't that, it's like asking women about their issues, like to construct social policy is like asking oil executives to construct energy policy. It's like what we do with energy.
What do you mean?
To me, it seems to me very clearly, you know, it's like if you ask day traders at Wall Street or whatever, you ask them to craft the SEC policy, just give them kind of the list and you go like, hey, you guys can write it. I think like if you allow women to like write abortion law, it seems like they're very materially interested. There's just an obvious conflict of interest.
So they're too biased to...
Yeah, like it should be celibate, learned men, like who kind of like remove themselves away from, you know, kind of worldly, especially like in sexual politics thing. They should be just like, you know, celibate men, elderly men with no sort of interest in sex. I think like that's, I don't know. I don't think this has been tried before, but I feel like that's a good thing forward.
I think it makes sense. We should also have like executives of companies determine workers' policies, like workplace policy and
that's
wage
true. Like,
stuff.
I feel like it should be like people who don't work at all. I feel like they should be determining like workers' policy. Yeah, it should be like people who sit in their rooms,
homeless
and, like,
people, just like straight up
homeless people.
Yeah.
Homeless people should be very involved. I feel like if you have like this obvious conflict of interest, I mean, you can't be complaining about that the outcomes, the policy outcomes are bad.
Right.
So,
children should determine foreign policy and like whether we go to war or not. We should say, like, what do you guys think about Japan, kids? What do you think? Should we nuke them?
And they love Japan. They love their Pikachus.
It makes sense. They're going to say no. All right. I think you're on
generally, they're like, But like a lot of that stuff it just adds up. It's not that it's, again, each particular episode, if I were just to play you one, it wouldn't be like, this horrible thing. It's just like every day you listen to these people and you sort of like something in you hardens every time you hear like a thing that you just identified as a bad thing. Yeah, this is sort of a variety, I think, of mental illness consciously inflicted upon myself. But that's what I don't like.
So you did this for like 2 years, you said? Or thereabouts?
No, for a few months. And then I stopped.
A few months.
And then I stopped listening to podcasts altogether, I think. So I think I started in May, or might have been the summer last year, and then I did it for the rest of the year, and then I stopped.
Okay. Did you notice any differences when you stopped? Like, did you stop strangling kittens every day? Or?
No, that's just, how can you stop strangling kittens? But no, I just feel like, I don't listen to podcasts anymore. I just listen to music now. I resubscribe to I always thought like paying for streaming music is like the biggest, like kind of Orwellian, I hate the word, but like, that's like the man finally took over the world. But now I'm paying for music because I can't listen to people talk. And I'm just,
I'm afraid to ask what you listen to.
Oh yeah, mostly just Carly Rae Jepsen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just that 24/7, just Carly Rae Jepsen. She's really good, She's really good. Yeah, mostly it's kind of. I listen to the new Logic. I listen to the Bohemian Rhapsody or whatever. I listen to that. That's a good one.
Okay.
So, do you have other projects like this that you've done or that you're thinking of doing in the future? Or is this just kind of like a one-off thing, or do you like kind of set these little kind of challenges for yourself in other ways? Or
I think I do, but I kind of just find something I like and then I start sort of getting into it. It's not really like formalized like this anymore. I might do something like this, but it's probably not going to be podcast related. I think I'm done.
What if you just drink like urine every day? Like, what if you do that?
That sounds good. That sounds pretty easy to do. I feel like that's pretty. I feel like there's a lot of like ascetics that do that, but they don't advertise that. They just kind of do it.
Well, a lot of Waterworld fans.
Yeah, a lot of people like to dress up as furries. I think they like that. There's a lot of good accounts on Twitter that do that. They seem fun.
Right. Do you have any more questions for Ed on the topic, Donald, or should we move on to our listeners' questions?
Let's move on to listeners' questions, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So, we got one in the Discord here. This is from our friend Andy in Sweden. Mm-hmm. He asks, why'd he roast me for liking Stalker?
Stalker, this has been the TV show that's been, Stalker is the Tarkovsky movie.
Yeah.
From the 70s, 80s? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think the 70s, yeah.
I think it's, there's a couple of reasons. I think I read like a good Jameson. I think it's in this, I don't remember which book it is. I think it's in his book on world cinema. But it's a very bad movie, if you've ever seen it. It's like, it's one of these things when you were like a child, where I grew up in Arizona, you kind of saw a lot of Tarkovsky. You saw a lot of Tarkovsky when you were like kind of like a smarty. You were like one of these really smart people.
Yeah.
So you sat down and you just sort of watched I think it's mostly Stalker. And it's just like ingrained in me. This is like a failure. I mean, if you read the production history of that film, you know that he filmed like a real film. Tarkovsky did. He filmed like a film that was supposed to be Stalker somewhere in Central Asia, and then they ruined the negative somehow. Like someone messed up. I think it was the director of photography that messed up the negatives, and they had to reshoot everything on no budget. They just had no money left, and they decided, well, we got to do something. And they decided, okay, we're just going to wander in this, next to this chemical plant. What's the worst thing that can happen? We'll just kind of wander around. We'll just sit in this chemical wastewater and discuss God or whatever. That's what the film is. And they all got cancer as a result of that, and they all died because of it. So.
Oh, no kidding! Wow, I didn't know that.
yeah, it's that bad. It's that bad of a movie.
It's literally cancer.
Yeah, that's right. It's cancer-inducingly bad. No, I just like it's just production kind of ruined it. Which is also like I don't think I like Tarkovsky that much generally, but like I especially don't like Stalker. And there's always like it's like people who have like lists of movies they like. There's always like. Whenever you see Stalker in there and it's the only Russian person is like a child or, they went to college. And that's it. That's a kind of a signifier like, oh yeah, I went to college and I saw this great classical Russian cinema. It's like, people who kind of have book lists and they have like one Russian book that they've read that they think is like top 10 best books ever. And it's always Dostoevsky. It's always Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. You always know that like they read one Russian book, and that was the one book that they read, and that's I don't know, that's just like kind of like a cool thing to do. Jordan Peterson has that. He has like Brothers Karamazov. It's his top 10.
That's a good book, to be honest. You don't like it?
No, I have. Actually, I think I kind of came around. But like, I was like, Brothers Karamazov is like his best.
No, I don't think it's his best either. But I do like Dostoevsky a lot. I like. I like The Idiot. I like Notes from Underground. I'm sure that's your favorite.
Oh, yeah, of course. That's, again, 15 years old. That was when you were in Arizona. That was what you read. I was really sick when I read. I don't know. It wasn't man. It was Crime and Punishment. I was, like, sick and back from school, and I just had nothing to do for, like, 2 days. So I read all of Crime and Punishment. So it's always like whenever I remember anything from that book, it's always like this nausea. That's the sort of physical reaction again.
I have that for Star Trek Next Generation because my dad had a bunch of VHS tapes of like the first 2 seasons, and I would always watch them exclusively when I was like homesick. And I remember having like a fever for a couple of days or something, and I'd watch just 20 episodes or something, and so I have like. My impression of Star Trek is just like really feverish and strange, and I think that probably improves it, to be honest.
That happened with me with Final Fantasy games because whenever I was home from school from sick, I would play those RPGs or something, and just delirious out of my mind, like with the flu or something, just like sick, and then trying to like I don't know play those games. So yeah, I think that maybe soured me on video games, maybe. But yeah.
That's good.
Those are like that. Final Fantasy and Stalker are 2 things that everyone always says are so great, but I have always found really boring.
Oh yeah, the Stalkers. I don't think people sit through and like listen to it. I mean, I think it's like if you when you were young, maybe you were like, and you could like focus, and you could like be like, oh, I have a day to waste, and I have like I can watch a Bellatar movie. And sit down and listen and watch 5 hours or 4 hours, 3 hours. Stalker is not that long, but it's still like very grating. And you can kind of force yourself, and then you kind of come out. You're supposed to come out again like this image, mythological image. I think of like you've leveled up. You now can kind of put something on your thing, but it's just you just wasted 2 hours of your time watching a guy slowly kill himself with cancerous chemicals. It's actually kind of. In the end, it kind of makes it more hardcore. I think it's more fun was that in mind. It was just like, oh, these people are killing themselves.
Yeah, and you're killing yourself by just wasting your hour or 2 hours.
Yeah, but you're not getting cancer except like a metaphorical one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Bellatar is I don't think I've ever sat through a whole movie. But
so you didn't sit through 7 hours of.
Yeah, no, surprisingly.
Okay.
But I do like just like slow paced movies. Just if like if the shots are well composed and everything, which I think Bellatar does a good job with. I can just appreciate like I'm watching a painting that kind of has some movement in it, you know.
I have like I still have a set of biases from like I used to read a lot of film stuff, and I used to read a lot of like American sort of Pauline Kael sort of Anthony Lane. I don't know. He counts as American. He writes for the New Yorker, and then like that sort of Mike D'Angelo on Twitter. He's pretty good, and they all have this sort of like they hate avant-garde things, and they hate like they really have like real sort of hatred of like people like Brenna, people like Bellatar, where like, oh, this is not really cinema, this is something else. This should be in like a museum or something, or like maybe in a gallery, but it doesn't belong in like this our popular vitalist form of like, you know, Scorsese, that kind of thing, or, you know, those sort of things. But I have kind of the opposite position. Again, this is something I've been doing where like, I think you can't just stay in one position. You have to see the other position also. And I have come around where I like avant-garde stuff a lot more now. And I watch like Michael Snow stuff. I like that stuff. But I still have a kind of very reflexive sort of like, if nothing moves for 20 minutes, you know, it's not really a movie. I still think it's a form. It's like, what's his name? Bresson used to have this 2 words. There's cinematograph, which is like the particular possibility of the cinema. And then there is, I think it's like film theater. It's like really kind of more fast-paced, dialogue-oriented stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of dominant. And that's really what kind of we think of as cinema. But the other part where you really explore the possibility of the image, that's something else. I kind of like that division. I think there is a division.
Sure.
It's just, and it's kind of, maybe it's generic, maybe it's formal, but there is a real difference between Bellatar and even someone like Tarkovsky. I think Tarkovsky is much more narrative-oriented throughout his life.
Yeah. Did Tarkovsky do Andrei Rublev?
Yeah, Andrei Rublev, yeah.
I like that movie. That was a good one.
Yeah, that's a great movie.
Whatever we want to call it, movie or whatever.
No, that one's a film. Yeah, that one is a fairly, like, I think sort of classically sort of film about a person, about a particular thing. Yeah, that's his second. His second kind of official feature movie, and that one's really great. And then he did The Mirror after that I like a lot, and then. Yeah. So that period of like first 3 movies that he did was like Ivan's Childhood, Andrei Rublev, and The Mirror. Those are really great. That's his black and white stuff, and it's
I'll check those other 2 out. I haven't seen those.
Oh yeah, those are good. I think a lot of like you've probably seen like stills from them because they're kind of, again, like if you've seen like one perfect shot, those types of accounts. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of like. He's really inventive with sort of the shots, even though those films I think are more or less, again, they're not avant-garde. They're not trying to really push the boundary too much, but they are kind of very clever. Yeah, he's very good about the image. I think he was kind of raised, again, in Arizona, he was kind of raised into this pantheon of like, this is what great cinema is.
Right.
This is we have our own, the French have, their Godards and whoever, and we have Tarkovsky. And,
yeah, the great auteur of Arizona.
Okay. And I feel like that's, once you've seen it, you kind of develop a relationship with it, which is true of a lot of like stuff, is that you've sort of, especially stuff that you were taught in school, so you develop a kind of very different relationship to it than you do to things that you sort of discover on your own. And that's a kind of a deleterious effect, I think, of this other thing, this criterion effect that I've been talking about before, is that it's sort of, I know it's not an argument against canon, it's more an argument against, I guess it is somewhat an argument against canon, is that like when you reify the relationship between, I guess, a corpus of work or whatever, and yourself, you can never sort of find it. You can never discover it truly because someone else found it for you. So it always sort of, you're always kind of given it. It's always there in the background. It's like, I think Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, a lot of those type of great Russian literature, you were given it ahead of time, and you were never going to rediscover it again in a way that was really truly alive. So it's always kind of dead to you. It's always foreclosed to you. And that's why I like Jean-Luc Godard's position. Just destroy all of cinema. We should just burn it, or keep it only for montage purposes for the future. But we shouldn't be we shouldn't be suffering because, we lost all these precious prints. Like film deteriorates. Every year we're losing thousands of tons of print from, the 1920s, from the silent era, because they weren't using the correct sort of preservation techniques. And in Hollywood, there was a big fire and they lost all the negatives for all the stuff. And Godard's reaction to that was just just film new, get new stuff, buy a Kodak camera and film something good. I like that. I feel like, it does exist and it does form a background, and it's sort of it becomes a sort of reserve of things that you could use for the future, but it's insane to be you got to watch Stalker to be, to go to college or to be a normal person. That's not really an attitude. Anyway, for a lot of film guys, go ahead.
No, I was just going to lead us into our next question. Do you have something more to add?
No, not really. I was just going to say, I was listening to an interview with Mike D'Angelo, or actually it was with Michael Sosinski, who was a film critic. And I was there's a continual sort of trope, I guess, in the biographies of critics that are really knowledgeable about a particular area of film, is that they get depressed for 2 years. They just get into a horrible spiral where they watch 3 or 4 movies a day because their wife left them or something, or because their kind of college career broke down, and they just sort of immerse themselves in it. And then afterwards they kind of come out and they kind of become experts in that area because they just watch 3 or 4 a day. But it creates a very warped idea of the canon, because you sort of educated yourself in all of cinema or in all of literature over the course of a few years. And it's sort of it becomes the background, but it's never sort of given to you in the way that it's not given to you in the way a normal person would receive it. So it's very foreign.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense to me. The next question is sort of related a little bit to this discussion of opinion making and stuff. This comes from our friend Sean R. Moorhead on Twitter. He says, I would like to know Ed's opinion of David Foster Wallace.
Well, yeah, DFW is sort of again, you went to college, so you have a copy of Infinite Jest or whatever, or you went to a big school, so it's, you have I don't know, you have a big sort of set of canon that's, again, for a college person, you always read David Foster, and that's kind of how he is for me. Is he's a kind of, when you're in college and you that kind of thing, that always becomes a kind of a signifier of having gone to college. I like his nonfiction. I like his. He has opinions, I think, on Dostoevsky also. He has an essay on Dostoevsky about the Joseph Frank translation. And
right, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and he has weird opinions on him. I don't know if I remember really just. And then he has kind of the big essays of I think on porn. It's called Big Red Sun. That's really sort of strange thing. And then
is that the one where he went to the porn awards or whatever?
Oh yeah, he pseudonymously went to, as a Rolling Stone correspondent, he went to the AVN.
Yeah.
Adult Video Network, I don't know, some award ceremony, and that happens right before Oscars, and it's in the same sort of casino environment, but it's meant to be the sort of other of film, but it's sort of it's very kind of dark. It is actually, I think, what he kind of subjected himself there was a challenge of that sort, where like he had to watch like all the award things, and I think it really sort of, that one's interesting. And he wrote like a bunch of decent nonfiction, but I mostly admire him as a very upstanding human being. I don't really like him as an author as much, I think, as he's a role model for me as a person.
Really?
Yeah.
How's that?
The way he treated women was very good. I feel like he was very respectful and never did anything wrong.
Okay, I'm not familiar with his history with women.
Oh, it's nothing. It's nothing. It's just respect. It's just profound respect for women.
Okay. I'll have to do a little bit more Wikipedia searching after I check out yours.
You'll just be amazed of how good he was as a person.
Okay. I'm actually a fan of Infinite Jest myself. I remember reading that when I was like high school, early college years, that kind of thing. I enjoyed it. I thought there was a lot of stuff that I could relate to, and it was just like well expressed, some of the ideas and everything.
Yeah, I remember it kind of like I remember it in the sense that I think I read that, and then I read all of Joyce. I think all of like novels of Joyce when I was like just entering college, and I just remember like it's just kind of blank. But I remember liking it. I remember thinking like, oh, this is again like I had this attitude of like I got to read this because this is like the smart person does.
Right. Yeah.
And then I was just sort of. I mean, I missed all of the references. I didn't get anything like in terms of like all the sort of pop culture stuff. I didn't have the same background, so I didn't get it. But it was like I made it through. Yeah, I remember I kind of liked it. It was kind of good. It was good in the sense of like, oh, okay, this is an object of admiration. But it wasn't like, oh, I've really sort of connected with it. I think I'd have to reread it. And that I can't really do that anymore. I think there's, again, like Bellatar, once you're sort of out of college, you don't have a month or a year to waste doing something, committing to a project like that. But I'll reread it.
Go ahead.
I reread his nonfiction, but I'm probably not going to reread fiction in this way, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, I somehow was able to read Infinite Jest twice, and I read Gravity's Rainbow, I think, at least 3 times, and I think I started it a 4th time. I was, this attitude you're talking about of like needing to read the really good canonical stuff. I managed to do that when I was younger. I don't think I could, I can barely get through like a chapter these days.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much of that is like the phone having destroyed my attention span or whatever. But...
Right. I like that people use this sort of pseudo-naturalistic of like the attention span or whatever. Whenever people span, but really what it destroyed is patience. Is like it's not really there's a kind of like a physical thing of like, or like a pseudo-psychological thing of like, oh, this altered my brain chemicals. But
yeah, that's a good point.
It's just you're just not as you just don't have the virtue of patience anymore or whatever.
Yeah, it's the discipline. I don't have the discipline to like, because I remember even being very regimented about it, that I wanted to read 50 pages a day when I was trying to get through one of the readings of Gravity's Rainbow, and I did it, and I was enjoying it, but there was also like a discipline there of like, I'm not gonna not do that. That's just not an option.
Yeah, I always like when people sort of make sort of like this pseudo scientific of like, oh, I'm not just lazy or stupid. I'm just, I have anxiety or whatever. I don't know, like not again, like there is a diagnosis and there is a real thing, but it always becomes a sort of foreign thing where like, oh, my attention span is short. I don't have patience.
People sort of find these terms to describe very typical, like, like you're saying, just sort of personal failings, finding medical or psychological kind of explanations for it.
I feel like it's committing this sort of, I feel fundamentally like psychoanalysis is not about like fixing you or like not about dealing with pathology in a true way. It's mostly about like dealing with kind of the range of behaviors that are normal, I think, or like more or less sort of societally average. And there is a kind of an area of pathology, psychopathology, and a lot of people sort of want to place themselves in the other domain because it kind of makes it foreign to you. It doesn't make it you. It makes it the chemicals in your brain.
Yeah.
Or it makes it the other thing. But but yeah, like I used to have, I think I still have like the notebooks where I would just do like, I would copy passages from books that I read, and or like things like that, or like I would be like, hey, today I'm going to read X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to do that, and but no, I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
What do you think, Don? Do you have any thoughts on the whole discussion there on mental pathology or whatever?
Yeah, it's hard to separate them sometimes. I mean, because there's right now kind of like a wave of just reinforcing that kind of idea of everything that you can't do has to be because of some objective cause, like kind of like just kind of imposed on you. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. Sometimes I find that a lot too, but it kind of does add extra kind of challenge to then break through that, because you have to find ways to take responsibility even when it doesn't, it's harder to do so because you've kind of whipped yourself up into this kind of mental state of saying, oh, my attention span's bad, so I won't be able to do that or something. So I don't know. I find it with movies and stuff, like I find it really hard to just sit through a whole movie. So I have to kind of get up and get around. Like, if I go to the theaters, I have to get up, 4 or 5 times during the movie and just walk around for a second or something, because I just can't handle like 2 hours kind of straight or something like that. But like, I think part of it is just, but that to me, that's an improvement over not going to movies and saying, well, I just can't go because I won't be able to sit through it or something, like, so it's kind of a strange way that it kind of all, I don't know, jumbles together in your mind, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got one more question for you, Ed.
Oh, sweet.
So is Whole Sweat mentally ill? If he is, he's using it well for posting. And after this, I don't think there's any question. But go ahead and answer it.
I don't know. I feel like, again, I don't really know if I understand like pathology. I think pathology does exist in this way of like, I think people are genuinely sort of like seeing things and hearing things, and like are genuinely like, on some level unable to kind of participate in society in a functional way, and that does exist. But I don't know if I agree with like the project of analytical kind of, or I guess it's just kind of mainstream sort of psychology, where like I feel like I don't know if it applies to like, I think there's a zone of psychoanalysis which is where you sort of address the needs of general kind of mental wellness of a kind of an average person, and then there's a zone of pathology, and they shouldn't be crossed in this way. So I think everyone, again, like not in the kind of blasé way, but like everyone is sort of out of whack in a certain respect. Like people do have commitments that are kind of odd and at odds with other people, but it doesn't become necessary to medicate against it, or like it doesn't really follow that you have to treat it as you don't have to treat it as a kind of a second nature. It doesn't become second nature just because of that. There has to be an extra step, I feel like. So yeah, I don't think I think mental illness is more like sort of mental illness in the older usage is more like you're not right. There's like something like it's more almost like a moral sort of thing. There's like an ethical, and in that sense, I think that's probably like everyone is mentally ill, but like mental illness in the sense of like psychopathologically, you've sort of transgressed the boundary between like wellness and non-wellness. I feel like that's a very different thing, and I don't think I'm there. I might be, that's again, like it's very hard to determine. You're on the moving ship and you're sort of determining what the weather is, I guess. But yeah. I don't think I am. I think I'm fairly okay. But yeah, like I took that question very seriously. No, I am mentally ill.
Okay.
I'm in a mental institution, and and that's where I'm posting. They allow me an hour a day to post.
Sure.
Yeah, we're lucky to have you. It kind of explains the audio quality, I guess.
I just snuck it in. It's one of those things where like they photograph Bobby Shmurda in the prison.
Oh yeah.
It's one of those things.
I guess while we're on the topic, we could do this question too. Do you guys think some people are performatively depressed or anxious?
I always think of it kind of, I mean, there's kind of like a cheap way to answer this that I always kind of feel like is that if people are pretending to be ill, then there's some sort of problem there anyways, kind of
Yeah,
thing. You know
that's
what
a
I mean?
fair
Like
point.
it's,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like it's not like it's, I don't know, like if it's yeah, I mean, it makes complete difference in how I guess you would treat them to respond to the problem. But like, yeah, I don't know. Like it's not if someone is I don't know, like bedridden for days or something like that, then that's just what it is. It's like it's not doesn't really, I don't know. It's almost like you kind of have to treat it. I don't know, but and at the other end of that too is that I don't get obsessing about what other people are doing as much, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just kind of like, well, then that's what that person's doing or something like that. Like it's not the worst thing in the world, kind of thing, compared to a lot of other things too. So I get when it's like you see it pervasively, like you just see it so often, so like everywhere you kind of like might believe that. But yeah, that's just kind of my quick take on that kind of thing. Yeah. So
Yeah, I have two thoughts on this. One is that if sometimes people might not know what their problem is. They just know there's some problem, and they know that if they say I have anxiety, I have depression, that they'll get some kind of help. So maybe they're not exact. That's not actually the issue. Maybe they're just lonely. Maybe they're just they have low self-esteem or something. It could be something really mundane like that, but they just don't know how to articulate it in a way, or they're just not brave enough to call it for what it is. Maybe they even do know what the real issue is, but they're going to call it this other thing. I'm not going to be too hard on someone for that, I guess. And then the other thing is that there's sometimes you see people getting upset about the idea of people, quote, faking it or being performative about these sorts of things and stuff. And that makes me wonder, like, what those people, what their stake in like debunking someone else's claims are, like being a sort of gatekeeper on the claim to being anxious or depressed. Like, what value do you think that you need to retain so that other people aren't allowed to claim that? That's a weird sort of maneuver that I think is that's a little bit. I just don't think very highly of that. I think that's sort of a pernicious thing.
Yeah, like I said before, I think there's a kind of there's an area I think of genuine, again, pathology of like people who are debilitated or unable to sort of partake in the same things that everyone else does. That does exist. I think there's a sort of a category mistake that a lot of the determination of kind of who you are, in theory, like a lot of people kind of talk about the constitution of the subject. That's kind of fundamental, sort of, for many thinkers. But what that means is it's almost like a sociological category. It's like, well, who you are is kind of constituted by this other order, which is language or society or capital or something. You're constituted by this other thing. At the same time, you're also like kind of, there is an element of individual agency, I guess, in some sense, or conscious agency, and there's an element of sort of unconscious sort of desire or whatever. But all of these things are sort of ways of talking about determination of who you are, and they're not really, it's hard to untangle what exactly kind of makes you a certain thing. Like, it's very difficult. And the move made by a lot of people is to sort of internalize all of it. It's just to kind of go like, well, all of it is sort of purely internalized, and it's sort of naturalistic. It all stems from like the imbalances of chemicals in the brain. And the opposite move is to be like, no, all of it is just kind of capital or whatever. It's just late capitalism makes me mad,
Yeah.
And I think they're like not wrong in the sense of like, I don't think they're like falsifiable statements of, you're sort of like, oh, you're just, you're mad because of this, this, and this. I think what the primary object is not really the ultimate cause or whatever, which I actually kind of like about a lot of sort of functional approaches to psychology, is just to get you sort of on your feet and moving. Yeah. And but the ultimate problem of determination is, again, like it's a question of analytical psychology. Is a question of like, well, what do you think is the ultimate sort of? You can't really delve into it without having a full sort of theory of the subject and society. So you can't really ever start. I don't know. I don't think there's an easy answer to it. It's just like some people are. A lot of it is social media. You self-select on Twitter people who are more likely to kind of go, oh, I'm mentally ill, and it's therefore I don't go outside and I just order food every day. I don't know. It's not the fact that they are that. It's the fact that they're sort of putting it out and you're able to kind of see it in this juxtaposition is what makes it sort of, I guess, performative or symptomatic in some way. But again, like people kind of freely sort of chose to do that. There are a lot of people who are pathologically ill, and there's nothing wrong with that in the sense of it's not like, this question of pretense or like whether or not it's actually like self-caused or something. That's unsolvable in some sense. But like on social media, it's kind of funny. I think it is sort of a funny thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so do you want to wrap it up there, or?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ed Buck, for coming on and telling us about your fun parties and all that. And
everyone's invited all the time.
Sure.
Cool.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. Thanks for listening, everybody. You can catch us on Twitter at YouCan'tWinPod. We got the Curious Cat up there for questions. Please keep sending those in. And if you are a $5 Patreon subscriber, you can get on the Discord, and then we're going to prioritize questions through there. So if you are on that tier, make sure that you link into the Discord and get set up that way. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.